The night is calm, the air is gentle, and as you listen, you might begin to feel that familiar wave of quiet curiosity, the kind that softens your thoughts and invites sleep closer, almost like the warmth of a crackling fire beside you. You're welcome here, and tonight we'll ease into a story about the coldest winter of the 19th century, told slowly, safely, and softly, in a way that lets your mind drift while still enjoying a peaceful historical journey. In case you're settling in, take a slow breath, relax your shoulders, and let the quiet settle around you as we begin. Before we wander too far into the cold of the past, may I ask where you're listening from, and what time it is over there? It's always comforting to imagine people from different places relaxing together in the same peaceful moment. And before we continue, if you enjoy calm stories like this, you're gently invited to tap like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It helps this small corner of the internet stay warm and supported. Now, tonight's journey takes us back to a winter that people would remember for generations. A season so cold that even those accustomed to harsh climates paused and looked around, sensing something unusual in the air. The year had carried on like any other, but as the first hints of frost appeared earlier than anyone expected, a quiet unease began to settle across villages, towns, and countryside homes. The cold approached softly at first. Thin sheets of frost stretched across windows long before winter officially began. People woke to see water pails iced over, even though it was still the season when leaves should have clung stubbornly to branches. The chill felt deeper, sharper, as if the season was arriving with an intention no one could yet fully understand. In rural areas, farmers stepped outside to check their fields and felt the sting of the cold immediately on their faces. A breath in the open air created thin, ghost-like clouds that lingered much longer than usual. They exchanged quiet glances, knowing that an early freeze could disrupt the rhythm of their work. But for now, they simply wrapped their coats tighter and continued their routines. Inside the towns, people gathered in markets and spoke softly about the sudden drop in temperature. Some mentioned the frozen wells, others the early frost that had settled like white dust on rooftops. No one knew what the coming months would bring, but there was a shared understanding that this was no ordinary seasonal shift. As the days shortened, families began preparing their homes with greater care. They checked their doors and windows for drafts, added extra layers to beds, and organized their daily tasks to avoid going outside more than necessary. Life slowly centered around the hearth, where warmth was a gift granted by the Creator through whatever fuel people had stored. If you'd like, you can take a moment here to settle deeper into comfort. Let your breathing slow, and allow the flow of the story to guide you gently forward. As the cold deepened, the soundscape of entire regions shifted. Footsteps on frost became crisp and deliberate. The wind carried a sharper tone, brushing across rooftops with a steady whisper. At night, even in busy towns, silence began arriving earlier, as if people instinctively retreated indoors before the cold could settle into their bones. Travelers on old roads described the way their breath shimmered in the air with each exhale. Horses moved more slowly, their hooves pressing into frozen ground with heavy thuds. Carriages groaned as wooden wheels stiffened from the cold. The world seemed to move at half its usual pace, inviting a quieter, slower rhythm. Every so often, take a moment to let the calm wash over you again. You're safe here, listening to a story from long ago, and nothing demands your full focus. You can drift if you need to. In the countryside, lakes developed delicate layers of ice that thickened with surprising speed. Children tested the edges cautiously while adults watched with concern. Frozen water changed the routines of entire communities. Washing clothes, watering animals, and collecting fresh water all required more effort and more careful planning. Merchants traveling between towns gathered in small groups at roadside inns, sharing brief conversations about how unusually early the freeze had arrived. Though the inns were simple, the warmth offered inside felt like a blessing in weather like this. People wrapped their hands around warm cups, letting the heat soothe their numb fingers. Through all of this, life continued with a steady, cautious rhythm. People adjusted, adapted, and kept moving forward in quiet determination. Even in harsh weather, there was a certain beauty in the softness of frost-coating branches and the stillness that settled over fields. If you feel yourself sinking deeper into rest, that's completely fine. These stories are meant to accompany you gently, not demand your attention. Let them float around you like a soft blanket of sound. As the winter approached its peak, the early signs made it clear that the cold was not just an inconvenience but something far more intense. People who had lived through countless winters paused and admitted to one another that they had never experienced anything quite like this. The world felt quieter, heavier, as though wrapped in layers of frost-touched silence. And slowly, day by day, the season revealed itself as a truly exceptional winter, one that would shape memories, challenge communities, and leave a mark on history in the quietest but most enduring way. The deeper the cold settled, the more it shaped the rhythm of daily life. Families who normally spent afternoons outdoors found themselves gathered inside for most of the day, speaking quietly, sharing simple tasks, and conserving energy. The outside world became a place to approach with caution, a place where the cold could seep quickly into fingers and toes if someone stayed too long. Indoors, people relied on steady warmth provided through resources that ultimately came from the generosity of the one who controls all seasons. Farms across the countryside grew still, as if holding their breath. Fields that once carried the scent of soil and grass became rigid surfaces dusted in white. Barns turned into safe shelters for animals, and farmers spent extra time there, checking on livestock, adjusting feed, and making sure every creature had enough warmth to survive the long nights ahead. These routines became comforting rituals, dependable and quiet. In towns, merchants rearranged their stalls so they could pack up faster, often closing early as the temperature plunged before sundown. Streets that once echoed with conversation became muffled under snow. People walked briskly, breath puffing in steady clouds, eager to return home where warmth awaited. The cold made everyone move with purpose, but also with patience, understanding that rushing in such conditions rarely helped. Every minute or two, feel free to let your breathing slow again. You don't need to cling tightly to the story. It's here to keep you company, whether your mind follows every detail or drifts softly away. Travel between regions grew more difficult as the deep freeze continued. Ice spread across waterways, forming surfaces strong enough to hold the weight of carts in some places, while in others the ice remained unreliable and dangerous. Travelers listened carefully for the unsettling cracks beneath their feet and guided their horses cautiously, knowing that the winter demanded respect. Fishermen along frozen lakes changed their routines entirely. Instead of boats, they used simple tools to carve openings into the ice, lowering lines into dark water below. It was quiet, slow work, done with steady focus. The cold made every movement deliberate, and the silence around them created an almost meditative feeling, as though the world had slowed to match the pace of their breath. Inside homes, evenings stretched longer than usual. With limited daylight, families gathered around small sources of warmth, sharing stories, mending clothes, or simply sitting together in comfortable silence. Shadows flickered gently across walls, creating a calm atmosphere that helped soften the harshness of the season. In these moments, even the cold seemed distant, held at bay by togetherness and the warmth allowed by the Creator through firewood and shelter. If you feel yourself sinking deeper into rest right now, that's perfectly natural. These old stories were never meant to rush. They're here to steady your thoughts and give your mind something soft to wander through. As the coldest weeks arrived, the landscape transformed into something almost dreamlike. Trees sparkled with icy crystals that caught the morning light. Snow rested in perfect stillness across fields and hills, untouched except for the faint tracks of animals searching for food. Even the wind changed its tone, becoming softer but more persistent, gliding through branches with a slow, steady whisper. In many regions, people began measuring the cold in unusual ways. How quickly water froze once poured into a bowl, how long it took for blankets to cool after being hung outside, or how many hours passed before a window's frost pattern melted. These became small markers of time, quiet reminders of the season's strength. By now, communities had fully adjusted. People rationed supplies carefully, checked on their neighbors, and made choices that prioritized safety. Though the season was harsh, there was a calm resilience in how people faced each day. They understood that winter, like all things, would eventually change, and until then, patience and preparation were their closest companions. And as nights grew even quieter, the world seemed wrapped in layers of frost and silence. Travelers describe how sound carried differently, almost as if voices floated farther before dissolving into the cold air. That unique stillness became a memory many would recall decades later, long after the winter had passed. Take another gentle breath here. You don't need to analyze anything. Just let the atmosphere settle around you, soft and slow. Near the end of the season, people began to notice subtle signs of change. Ice on rooftops dripped slightly during midday. Snow packed beneath boots softened just a little. These small shifts brought relief, like hints of a distant promise. Though the cold still clung firmly to the land, the world was already preparing for its gradual release. And so, this extraordinary winter continued its quiet rule until the natural order, by the will of the one who governs all seasons and their transitions, allowed warmth to return. People would remember those months not only for the biting cold, but for the patience, cooperation, and endurance that carried them through. No dramatic ending, no sudden thaw, just a slow, gentle turn toward spring. And that is where we leave this chapter for tonight, in the soft middle ground between cold and warmth, between stillness and movement, letting your thoughts drift wherever they wish, without needing any clear conclusion. A calm ending, open and quiet, just as nights like this are meant to be. The first sign of the unusual winter arrived not with a storm, but with a quiet, almost delicate shift in the air. People stepped outside in late autumn expecting a familiar chill, yet what greeted them was sharper, deeper, and strangely heavy. Even the simplest morning routines, fetching water, checking the fields, walking to the nearest market, felt different under this sudden cold. Breath lingered longer in the air, forming pale clouds that drifted slowly before fading away. It was the kind of cold that made people pause, not out of fear, but curiosity, wondering if this was merely an early freeze or the beginning of something far more demanding. As the days passed, the temperature dropped further, settling in as if it had no intention of leaving. Wells froze overnight, and a thin layer of ice-coated buckets left outside, catching the morning light like fragile glass. Farmers touched the frozen soil and realized how quickly the earth had hardened. They exchanged quiet comments with neighbors, noting how unusual it was for this level of cold to arrive so quickly. Still, people tried to move through their routines with patience, trusting that preparation and steady effort would help them adapt to whatever the season brought. Travelers along rural paths described the sensation of the cold settling through their coats, reaching their fingers even when wrapped in layers. Horses moved with deliberate steps, visible breaths swirling around their heads. The sudden cold made journeys slower, the road stiff and unyielding beneath wheels and hooves. Yet there was a certain calmness to the landscape, a stillness that made sound travel farther and made the world feel wider and quieter than usual. Travelers leaned into that silence, listening to the crunch of frost beneath them. Inside homes, families began noticing how quickly the warmth left rooms once the fire dimmed. People added more blankets to their beds, hung thicker cloth near windows, and organized tasks indoors so that no one needed to step out more than necessary. These were small adjustments, the kind guided by instinct as much as experience. The sudden cold had not yet reached its peak, but people sensed that endurance would be needed sooner rather than later. Every few moments, you can let your breath slow again, allowing the gentle rhythm of the story to soften your thoughts and ease your body into rest. This is a slow, steady winter, and the telling of it can be just as calm. Markets reflected the changes as well. Vendors moved quickly, arranging goods in a way that minimized exposure to the air. Conversations were shorter, filled with soft exhalations of visible breath. Items that once stayed fresh easily now required more care, as the cold could harden bread, freeze stored water, or stiffen fabrics. People carried their goods close to their bodies, preserving the warmth granted through the Creator's provisions. Children, usually full of energy even in cool months, found themselves staying indoors more often. The sudden deep cold made outdoor play brief, their laughter replaced by quiet indoor activities, stacking simple toys, watching the fire, or helping with tasks suited to small hands. Their awareness of the cold was different, more immediate, and their families kept them close and warm. Travelers who crossed open fields noticed how the wind carried a different weight. It swept across flat lands with a sharpness that encouraged people to lean forward slightly, bracing themselves against its steady push. They described the landscape as beautiful but stern, the cold forming delicate crystals on blades of grass and frost patterns on clothing before they even reached their destination. Within small villages, the early cold sparked cooperative routines. Neighbors checked on one another, especially the elderly or those who lived farther from central paths. People shared extra firewood or warm meals when possible, understanding that kindness was a natural part of enduring harsh seasons. These quiet acts of support created a gentle strength within the community. If you're drifting slightly, that's perfectly all right. The story is meant to move slowly, like frost spreading across a window, one quiet layer at a time. As the freeze deepened, the sound of footsteps changed. Boots pressed into hardened ground with a crisp, echoing crack, a sound that carried clearly through the stillness. Even familiar paths felt slightly foreign under this sudden firmness. The earth responded to the cold with a kind of rigid patience, accepting the weight of winter without resistance. Merchants traveling between towns began adjusting their schedules. They left earlier, moved slower, and carried more supplies to account for the unexpected conditions. Some noted that even their animals seemed cautious, sniffing the air with a sensing instinct that made them hesitate before advancing. The season was shifting quickly, and creatures of all kinds felt the change. Inside workshops, craftspeople found their materials reacting differently to the cold. Wood felt harder and more brittle, metal chilled quickly, and cloth stiffened if left too long near open air. This required adjustments in technique, but it also gave them a steady rhythm, slow, measured movements suited to long winter nights. As the cold continued settling across land and water, mornings began to hold a particular beauty. The rising light reflected across frozen surfaces, creating soft glimmers that made even simple scenes appear serene. In these moments, despite the challenges, people paused to appreciate the calmness that winter brought. And as the early phase of the coldest winter unfolded, communities acknowledged quietly that this was no ordinary season. The world was shifting into a cold deeper than memory, and everyone, from farmers to merchants to families, prepared themselves for a long, demanding journey through the chill. As the cold settled deeper into the season, waterways began transforming in ways that surprised even those familiar with winter. Small streams stiffened first, turning into narrow ribbons of ice that glistened under faint sunlight. Larger rivers followed, freezing from their edges inward until entire surfaces appeared still and solid. People approached them carefully, testing each step before placing their weight, understanding that the slightest misjudgment could break the thin barrier between air and dark water. These frozen landscapes became both beautiful and sobering, reminders of nature's ability to shift its character swiftly and without hesitation. Within towns, the sudden cold influenced the rhythm of social life. Places where people typically gathered became quieter, with fewer lingering conversations and shorter visits. The air inside homes felt thicker and warmer compared to the sharpness outside, encouraging families to stay indoors longer. Windows frosted over in intricate patterns, tiny crystals forming delicate shapes that children traced with fascinated fingers. Every breath indoors carried a sense of gratitude for the warmth made possible through resources granted by the most powerful. And in the evenings, the glow of quiet fires gave each household a feeling of protected stillness. Travelers who moved between villages spoke of long stretches where the cold created an unusual clarity in the air. Landscapes looked sharper, distant hills more defined, and sounds traveled farther. A single dog bark from a farmhouse could echo across fields, reaching the ears of someone walking far down an empty path. The cold, while demanding, brought with it a peaceful openness, a sense that the world had paused just slightly, waiting for something unseen to unfold. This clarity was calming for some, overwhelming for others, but undeniable to all who crossed those frozen expanses. And yet, the challenges remained constant. Tools left outside stiffened or cracked, hinges froze shut, and simple tasks required extra steps. Fetching water meant breaking through a layer of ice, carrying it quickly indoors before it froze again. Cooking took longer as ingredients chilled immediately when exposed to the open air. These small obstacles accumulated into a new rhythm of life, one shaped by patience, caution, and slow, deliberate movements. People adapted naturally, their routines becoming a steady dance with the cold. From time to time, if you feel your mind drifting gently away from the details, that is completely fine. These stories are told slowly on purpose, giving your thoughts permission to wander like frost traveling across a quiet window. Communities increasingly relied on shared effort. Woodcutters worked longer hours to gather fuel while it was still manageable. Neighbors checked on one another, especially those living on the outskirts. Simple acts, repairing a door, offering warm soup, helping carry heavy items, became part of the gentle resilience that kept villagers steady through the sudden freeze. This unity provided warmth in ways that went beyond temperature, grounding people in a shared understanding of the season's demands. Animals, too, responded to the cold with instinctive adjustments. Cattle huddled together more closely in barns, conserving warmth. Horses stood near sheltered walls, turning their bodies away from the wind. Even the wildlife that roamed forests moved with deliberation, leaving fewer tracks, conserving energy as food sources dwindled. Nature reshaped itself quietly, each creature playing its part in the slow choreography of winter survival. The world's stillness grew more pronounced as the season continued. Nights arrived earlier, casting long shadows across fields that sparkled faintly under moonlight. The cold altered textures, wood grown rigid, fabric turned crisp, and breath thickened into visible clouds. People stepped outside only when needed, their presence leaving small temporary impressions on snow that smoothed over with each gust of wind. The land seemed at rest, holding itself in careful suspension. Even with the difficulties, there were moments of gentle beauty. Early mornings where the horizon blushed with muted pinks and blues. Afternoons where the sun, though weak, cast a soft glow over frozen surfaces. Scenes that reminded people that winter was not only a test of endurance, but a season of quiet grace. These glimpses, brief yet memorable, stayed with many long after the cold had lifted. As the sudden cold established its firm grip, communities accepted the reality that this winter would be unlike those before it. They moved through each day with a calm determination, relying on thoughtful preparation and the Creator's mercy to guide them through. No one knew how long the intense cold would last, but everyone understood the importance of patience and cooperation. And as the season continued, the world settled into a deep, steady chill, a chill that marked the beginning of one of the most memorable winters of the century. Inside every home, the heart of winter living centered around the hearth, where warmth gathered in gentle waves and softened the sharpness of the season outside. Families instinctively gravitated toward this space, arranging their routines so that most tasks happened within its comforting reach. Meals were prepared slowly, with steam rising in delicate ribbons and filling the air with familiar scents that eased the tension of long, cold days. Even conversations shifted into softer tones, as though the quietness of winter encouraged everyone to match its pace. The warmth inside was not taken for granted. People understood that this comfort came through the Creator's mercy, delivered through firewood, shelter, and the steady efforts of those who tended to them. Across small villages, the structure of daily life changed naturally as temperatures fell. Clothes were layered carefully, with thicker fabrics placed nearest the skin and outer garments wrapped tightly to hold precious warmth. Chores were reorganized by priority. Anything requiring outdoor labor was done in short, purposeful bursts, and tasks that could be brought indoors were adapted accordingly. The cold shaped every decision, guiding people to conserve energy while still maintaining the rhythm of their responsibilities. These adjustments became the quiet framework that sustained homes through the harshest weeks. Within the walls of each household, evenings stretched into long, gentle hours illuminated by warm light. Children gathered near the hearth to listen to stories, trace patterns on blankets, or simply stare into the flickering glow that calmed their restless thoughts. Adults performed quiet tasks, mending clothing, preparing tools for the next day, or checking stored supplies. The peaceful routine carried its own kind of comfort, reminding everyone that home was a safe barrier between themselves and the relentless cold outside. This shared stillness helped families stay grounded, even when the weather demanded resilience. From time to time, you can allow your breath to settle into an easy rhythm. The story moves slowly, just like the winter it describes, and you're welcome to drift gently in and out of its details. The cold influenced even the simplest moments. A cup of water cooled almost instantly if set near a window. Bread hardened within an hour if left uncovered. Tools chilled so quickly that touching them without gloves would send a shock through the hands. These minor inconveniences taught families to handle objects thoughtfully, storing items close to the warmth when possible and planning small movements with care. Every gesture became purposeful, shaped by the season's demands. Inside kitchens, meals shifted to heartier, simpler dishes that held warmth longer. Soup simmered quietly, grains softened with slow cooking, and vegetables saved from autumn provided essential nourishment. Households made use of every ingredient available, grateful for the ability to prepare meals that fueled the body and comforted the spirit. The act of cooking itself became a ritual, one that offered warmth both in temperature and in the sense of familiarity it brought. Sleeping arrangements also changed as families adapted to the deepening cold. Extra blankets were laid on beds, and some families placed warm stones near their feet before sleep, allowing the heat, granted by the one who controls all conditions, to ease them into rest. On the coldest nights, people slept closer together, sharing warmth in the simplest and most natural way. This routine offered reassurance, reminding everyone that they were not facing the winter alone. As temperatures dropped further, houses began to creak softly under the pressure of the cold. Roofs contracted with faint pops, and wooden floors stiffened beneath every step. These sounds became a familiar backdrop to winter life, a kind of nightly conversation between the home and the season. Families grew accustomed to these noises, understanding them not as warnings, but as reminders of how the cold touched even the strongest structures. If you feel your thoughts drifting, let them. Winter stories are meant to move like slow, falling snow, one detail at a time, soft enough to carry you toward rest. During daylight hours, families relied on natural light filtering through frosted windows. Shadows shifted across walls in muted tones, giving rooms a calm, dreamy atmosphere. Tasks were completed in quiet cycles, stirring dishes, folding fabrics, tending to the fire, checking stored food, all performed in steady rhythms that matched the gentle hush of the season. People found comfort in these routines, even when the cold outside remained intense. In many homes, small corners were dedicated to essential supplies. Stacks of firewood were arranged neatly, tools hung in easy reach, and preserved food stored carefully in cool but protected spaces. These organized arrangements created a sense of readiness, giving families confidence that they could endure the cold as long as they remained thoughtful and steady. Preparation became a form of reassurance. Children often played simple indoor games that required little movement, conserving energy while passing long hours. They used wooden toys, soft fabrics, or even shaped small objects out of leftover materials from household tasks. The quietness of winter seemed to shape their creativity, encouraging gentle forms of play that matched the overall calm of the season. As the cold pressed on, families learned to anticipate the demands of each day. Waking early allowed them to rekindle fires before the chill deepened. Meals were planned with care, balancing what was needed with what could be spared. And through it all, they maintained a steady sense of patience, trusting that consistency and effort would carry them through the harshest moments. The hearth remained the center of the home, a constant source of warmth and stability. People tended to it with focus, feeding it when needed, clearing ash, adjusting wood so the flames held steady. This quiet maintenance became symbolic, a daily reminder that even in the coldest seasons, small efforts accumulated into comfort, safety, and peace. By the middle of the season, life inside the home had fully adapted to the winter's demands. The routines were steady, the pace slow, and the atmosphere one of quiet cooperation. Every member of the household contributed in some way, whether by tending the fire, assisting with meals, or simply being present. Together, they created a rhythm that allowed them not just to survive the cold, but to move through it with calm resilience. And through this soft, steady rhythm, the home became more than shelter. It became a warm center of hope and patience in a world wrapped firmly in winter's grasp. On especially cold mornings, families noticed how the air inside the house felt almost motionless, holding onto the night's chill until the fire fully awakened. Parents rose early, sometimes before dawn, to coax the embers back into glowing life. The gentle crackle of flames gradually pushed away the stillness, and within an hour, rooms shifted from rigid cold to soft warmth. These quiet morning moments became a ritual, steady, dependable, and comforting, as though the household breathed slowly back to life with each spark of heat allowed by the mercy of the Creator. As winter deepened, people relied more heavily on simple strategies to keep warmth inside. Thick rugs covered floors to block cold rising from the ground, and heavy curtains were drawn tightly across windows. Some families placed woven mats near doorways to prevent icy drafts. Even small adjustments, changing the position of seating, placing blankets near spots where the wind struck most, made a noticeable difference. These efforts, though subtle, added up to an environment that felt protected against the harshness outside. During the afternoon hours, when the sun sat low but still cast a faint glow, families often gathered in the warmest room of the house. Children played quietly or worked on small tasks, and adults used the time to repair tools, sort stored goods, or complete activities that required more light. The winter slowed time, stretching moments into long, gentle hours that allowed people to work steadily without haste. This slower pace, though unplanned, brought a kind of peace that many would later remember with surprising fondness. If your thoughts begin to soften and drift, that's perfectly fine. This story is meant to feel like a slow rhythm, steady and calm, guiding you deeper into rest without demanding your attention. As temperatures continued dropping, some households shifted their sleeping arrangements. Families moved beds closer to the hearth or gathered into fewer rooms to share warmth. Thick blankets, layered carefully, became essential companions through the night. People often slept wearing additional layers, knowing the cold could slip through even the smallest gaps. These shared arrangements created a sense of closeness that helped ease the weight of the long winter. Food storage became a daily concern. The cold preserved some items naturally, but it also introduced new challenges. Liquids froze in containers, vegetables chilled to the point of losing texture, and some items needed to be reheated repeatedly to remain edible. Families worked together to manage supplies, ensuring that meals stayed simple yet nourishing. They used what they had efficiently, recognizing that thoughtful consumption was key to enduring the longest, coldest nights. There were moments, however, when winter offered unexpected beauty. Light from the hearth reflected off frosted windows, scattering soft patterns across walls. Shadows danced gently in the flicker of flames, creating a peaceful ambience that wrapped the room in warmth. These sights, though quiet, gave families a sense of comfort that eased the heaviness of the season. Within the safety of their homes, people found small moments that felt tender and grounding. The soundscape of the home changed as well. Wood popped softly within the fire, floors creaked with the expansion of warmth, and wind brushed against the outer walls with a low, steady hum. These sounds formed a background rhythm that many found soothing, a sign that the home was holding firm, resisting the cold's attempt to seep inside. At night, these gentle noises lulled families into rest, reminding them they were safe within the shelter provided to them. Over time, routines became second nature. People adjusted their steps to avoid cold patches, remembered which corners held drafts, and learned how long each piece of wood burned. Children grew familiar with these rhythms too, helping where they could, understanding in their own quiet way that winter required cooperation. Through these shared habits, the home became a place of coordinated effort, each person contributing to the warmth and order of daily life. If you feel yourself sinking more deeply into comfort, allow it. The slow pace of winter encourages stillness, and this story is here to accompany you gently. By the peak of the season, homes had transformed into small sanctuaries. The world outside was harsh, stark, and unyielding, but inside, families created pockets of warmth through steady work and patience. They endured the cold not through grand gestures, but through consistency, tending the fire, preparing food, maintaining shelter, and supporting one another. These simple actions formed the foundation of survival. The coldest nights were the quietest, with snow absorbing sound until even the faintest noise felt distant. Families stayed close, listening to the muffled world beyond their walls. This stillness, though intense, brought a certain clarity, a reminder of the delicate balance between the harshness outside and the comfort within. It highlighted the value of home, warmth, and shared presence. As winter pressed on, people continued their routines with unwavering calm. They focused on each small task, knowing that patience was their strongest tool. And through this slow endurance, homes remained steady beacons of warmth in a season that demanded resilience. Inside these simple, humble shelters, households discovered a deep sense of unity, one that carried them through each cold night, each frosted morning, and each quiet moment in between. Across the countryside, farmers woke each morning to fields that seemed frozen in time, their surfaces hardened into pale, unmoving blankets of frost. Where soft soil once crumbled beneath the weight of boots, now the ground felt solid like stone. Every step echoed faintly through the still air, reminding farmers that winter had altered the very rhythm of their land. They moved slowly, taking in the sight of their once familiar fields transformed into shimmering plains. The cold had come early and stayed firmly, pushing them to adjust their expectations and routines with patience and quiet strength. Livestock care became the center of daily work. Barns, usually open and airy, were now kept tightly sealed to preserve any warmth they could hold. Farmers carried buckets of water warmed near the hearth, knowing that the moment it touched the cold air, frost would begin to form along the rim. Animals huddled together instinctively, their breaths creating small clouds that floated briefly before dissolving. Every creature, from cattle to chickens, depended on consistent care, and farmers took this responsibility seriously, understanding that survival in winter was a shared effort between people and the resources granted by the Creator. The frozen fields meant outdoor tasks required careful planning. Tools left outside overnight were stiff with frost, handles cold enough to sting unprotected hands. Farmers often warmed metal tools near a small flame before using them, ensuring they didn't crack under pressure. Even simple actions like opening a gate took more effort, as hinges froze and would swell with moisture. These small struggles reminded them how deeply the cold had settled into the land, leaving nothing untouched. When farmers walked the perimeter of their property, they noticed how quiet everything had become. Birds moved less frequently, their calls replaced by the occasional flutter of wings cutting through the stillness. Rabbits and deer left only a few tracks, their patterns faintly visible across the frosted ground. Nature itself felt slowed, as if every living thing were conserving energy to withstand the coldest days. This quiet atmosphere brought a reflective peace, even as farmers confronted the challenges ahead. If your breathing has begun to soften into a slower rhythm, allow it. The stillness of these winter fields is meant to lull your thoughts into gentle calm. Barn chores grew longer as winter intensified. Hay needed to be brought inside more frequently, and feed was rationed with caution to ensure it lasted through the season. Farmers checked the structural strength of barns, reinforcing weak spots and sealing cracks where cold winds slipped through. Inside these shelters, the earthy scent of hay mixed with the warmth from animals' bodies, creating a comforting pocket of life against the frozen world outside. Watering the animals required the most attention. Troughs froze solid overnight, and breaking through the surface ice became part of the morning routine. Some farmers carried warm stones to place at the bottom of containers, slowing the freezing just long enough for livestock to drink. These methods were simple but greatly appreciated, small examples of resourcefulness shaped by generations of experience and the Creator's guidance through necessity. Work in the fields slowed almost completely, but farmers still walked their land daily. They inspected fences, checked stored grain, and studied the frost patterns that formed across the soil. These inspections weren't driven by productivity but by a deep connection to the land, a sense of responsibility that did not disappear simply because winter had silenced the fields. Even in stillness, the land remained part of their daily thoughts. Snowfall led itself across the fields in slow, gentle waves. Each storm added a new surface, smoothing the landscape into soft curves and gradients. Farmers watched these changes closely, noting which areas drifted deeper and where the snow settled lightly. These observations helped them plan how to move through their land safely, avoiding sudden dips or hidden obstacles covered beneath the powdery surface. Children who lived on farms experienced this season differently. They bundled in layers, their noses pink from the cold, and followed parents to the barns, fascinated by how the world had changed. They learned to walk carefully on icy paths, to listen for the creak of frozen wood, and to appreciate the warmth inside barns more than ever before. These lessons, though simple, shaped their understanding of winter's power. If you feel yourself drifting slightly now, that is completely all right. These slow winter scenes are meant to quiet the mind, just as winter quieted the countryside. The routine of feeding livestock, checking water, maintaining barns, and navigating frozen fields created a rhythm that guided each day. Though demanding, the rhythm was steady, dependable, and deeply familiar. Farmers understood that endurance was not about rushing but about persistence. Small actions repeated with care, day after day, until the season eventually softened. Some evenings, after completing their tasks, farmers stepped outside to look across the fields one last time. The moonlight reflected off the snow, creating a silver glow across the landscape. From their vantage point, they could see long shadows cast by fences and trees, stretching across the frozen ground. The world felt still, almost suspended, as if waiting for the quiet shift that would eventually bring warmer days. The frozen fields also revealed signs of wildlife seeking shelter. Footprints led toward burrows or tree lines, and sometimes a fox could be spotted in the early dawn, its fur dusted with frost. These glimpses reminded farmers that survival was a shared struggle across all living things, each creature working in its own quiet way to endure the cold. Inside the home, farmers often ended their long days with a moment of reflection. They listened to the wind outside, noting its tone and direction, and mentally prepared for what the next day might bring. Winter demanded awareness, patience, and adaptability, qualities that farmers carried naturally through years of tending the land. Even as the freeze continued with unrelenting strength, farmers remained steady. Their connection to the land, their resilience, and their trust in the provisions granted to them helped guide each decision. Through every frozen morning and silent night, they remained anchored by the quiet knowledge that winter, harsh as it was, would eventually give way. As the cold deepened, farmers developed a practiced awareness of every sound across their land. The distant crack of ice expanding beneath the soil, the rustle of wind passing across bare branches, and the soft shifting of animals inside barns all formed a quiet chorus that told them how the night had unfolded. Each sound carried meaning, whether the temperature had dropped more than expected, whether the snow had drifted against fences, or whether animals needed extra care. This heightened sensitivity became part of their daily rhythm, guiding them long before sunlight touched the horizon. By midday, when the weak winter sun reached its highest point, farmers took advantage of the slightly softer air. Though still cold, this brief window made tasks a bit more manageable. They used the opportunity to transport feed, repair damaged structures, or check remote corners of their land. These hours were precious, allowing them to work with steadier hands before the temperature dipped again. Even so, each step required caution, as hidden ice could turn the simplest movement into a moment of risk. Patience, rather than speed, defined every action. The landscape often looked deceptively peaceful, coated in smooth layers of snow that stretched endlessly across the fields. But beneath that beauty lay frozen soil, brittle roots, and dormant crops waiting for warmth that felt impossibly distant. Farmers walked these fields with a deep respect, understanding the balance between nature's silence and its challenges. The stillness of winter held a strangely calming presence, making each slow footstep feel like part of an ongoing conversation with the land they cared for. If your thoughts begin to grow quieter, let them drift. These winter fields are meant to guide you into calmness, just as they guided farmers through long, cold seasons. Inside barns, livestock grew more sensitive to routine. Animals recognized the sound of footsteps, the rustle of hay, and the opening of barn doors. These familiar cues brought comfort, reminding them that care was coming. Farmers took time to observe each animal's condition, the brightness of their eyes, the steadiness of their movements, the warmth beneath their coats. These observations helped prevent illness and strengthen the quiet bond between caretakers and the creatures entrusted to them. Evenings often arrived with surprising swiftness. Shadows lengthened across the fields, and temperatures fell with a steady, deliberate drop. Farmers rushed to complete final tasks before darkness settled fully, securing doors, checking water sources, and ensuring that nothing needed urgent attention overnight. Once satisfied, they took one last look across the land, watching as twilight spread a muted glow over snow and frost. This daily moment of pause served as a gentle transition from work to rest. The coldest nights required extra vigilance. Some farmers rose once or twice before dawn to make sure animals remained warm enough or to confirm that no snow had piled dangerously high against barn doors. These brief visits into the frigid darkness were quiet acts of responsibility, taken with calm resolve rather than worry. The world outside in those hours felt untouched. Only the crunch of snow under boots and the soft exhale of livestock broke the silence. If you feel a deeper softness settling in your breathing, allow it to continue. Winter stories carry a natural lull, slow and steady. As the season continued, farmers noticed how even their tools seemed to respond differently to the cold. Wood grew rigid, iron contracted, leather straps stiffened. Maintaining equipment became a daily chore, not for productivity, but for readiness, because in such harsh conditions, having dependable tools brought a sense of assurance. These small routines built confidence, helping farmers stay prepared for whatever winter delivered next. Sometimes, in rare moments when the air stood completely still, sound disappeared almost entirely. Farmers described these moments as stepping into a world paused between breaths. Frost-covered branches hung motionless, and the snow underfoot seemed to swallow each step. These silences were not unsettling. Instead, they offered a quiet serenity that reminded farmers of the vastness of their surroundings and the calm that winter could bring. As weeks turned into months, the farmers' resilience became clear. They had adapted to each new challenge with steady determination. Their homes, barns, fields, and animals were maintained through routines shaped by experience, patience, and reliance on the provisions granted by the Creator. Even on the harshest days, they found small pockets of warmth in the breath of livestock, the glow of lanterns, or the familiar sound of firewood cracking in a hearth. Toward the later part of the season, farmers began noticing subtle shifts again. Snow softened slightly during brief moments of sunshine. Ice melted just enough to drip gently from fence rails. These changes were small, but meaningful, a quiet hint that winter, as strong as it was, would eventually ease its grip. It was a reminder that endurance had purpose, and that every cold day carried them one step closer to relief. And so, even in the face of the coldest winter they had known, farmers continued their routines with consistency and calm. They trusted their preparations, supported their animals, tended their land, and met each day with steady resolve. In these frozen fields, they discovered a deep resilience that carried them through every frost-laden morning and every silent night, holding firmly until the world slowly warmed once more. Across many regions, the waterways were among the first landscapes to reveal just how intense the winter had become. Streams that normally flowed with a soft murmur fell silent as thin sheets of ice spread across their surfaces. Within days, the ice thickened, turning familiar waters into glassy paths that reflected the pale light of winter skies. The transformation felt surreal to those who lived nearby. People stood at the edges, listening for the faint cracks beneath the surface, aware that the cold had reshaped the landscape with swift determination. What had once been moving, living water now appeared frozen in quiet contemplation. Larger rivers followed soon after. Their broad surfaces began to shimmer under layers of frost, slowly losing their deep currents to the steady grip of cold. Fishermen who knew these waters well paused at the sight, understanding that this shift was more than a seasonal change. It was a sign of a winter with uncommon strength. The riverbanks, normally lined with damp soil and drifting currents, turned solid and brittle. Even the reeds along the edges stiffened, their tips coated with delicate crystals formed overnight. Walking near these rivers required caution, as frozen edges could fracture without warning. Travelers who relied on river routes found themselves adjusting quickly. Boats rested unused on icy shores, their ropes stiffened by frost. Instead, people began crossing the frozen surfaces by foot or sled, testing each step and listening closely for signs of weakness in the ice beneath them. A single deep crack beneath the surface could send a ripple of alertness through even the bravest traveler. Yet, despite the risks, these frozen waterways offered a strange efficiency. Routes that once curved with the river's bends now became straight, silent paths stretching far into the distance. From time to time, let your breathing loosen again. This part of the story moves slowly, like a quiet river hidden beneath layers of ice. Animals, too, had to adjust to the frozen change. Birds landed cautiously, tapping the ice with their feet before settling. Small footprints appeared at the edges where creatures searched for water beneath the frozen surface. Some animals discovered thin spots where they could reach the cold water below, while others moved farther afield, seeking streams not yet overtaken by the freeze. Farmers watching from the distance noted how even wildlife seemed unsure of how to interact with these sudden expanses of ice. In nearby towns, the frozen waterways influenced daily patterns. Some communities used the ice as temporary roads, allowing carts to travel along straight paths that normally weren't accessible. The sound of wooden wheels gliding gently over frozen surfaces echoed softly across the landscape. People appreciated the convenience but approached each journey with respect, knowing that the stability of ice could change without notice. The winter had its own quiet rules, and those who listened carefully learned to recognize them. Fishermen adapted their methods to the frozen reality. Instead of casting nets from boats, they used hand tools to carve circular openings into the ice. Through these small portals, they lowered lines into the cold, dark water below. The work was slow and required patience, as the cold stiffened fingers and the stillness above contrasted sharply with the unseen movement of fish below. Yet the rhythm of cutting, fishing, and tending the ice holes became a routine that carried them through the winter. Children found the frozen waterways enchanting in their own way. With guidance from adults, they explored the safer areas, sliding cautiously across smooth surfaces, laughing softly as they discovered how easily they could glide. Their footprints dotted the ice like small constellations, each step marking a moment of simple joy amid the season's hardships. These moments of play brought lightness to the stillness surrounding the waterways. If your thoughts begin drifting like slow-moving frost, allow them. The calmness of these scenes is meant to ease your mind into deeper rest. As the freezing intensified, some waterways became so thick with ice that even heavy loads could cross safely. People transported firewood, food, and supplies across these surfaces, cutting the time it took to reach distant homes. For a brief period, the frozen rivers felt like new roads given by the season, silent, open, and direct. Yet no one forgot that beneath the surface, flowing water continued its steady path, hidden but persistent. Nights near the waterways were among the quietest of the season. Without flowing water to break the silence, the landscape felt suspended. The moon reflected sharply across the frozen surfaces, creating long bands of silver light stretching toward the horizon. Footsteps echoed more clearly than usual, each sound bouncing across the ice with crisp precision. Even the gentle movement of wind felt amplified in the open space, brushing lightly across frozen expanses. During colder bursts, the ice emitted deep, resonant groans as it expanded. These sounds, though startling to those unfamiliar with them, were simply part of the ice adjusting to temperature changes. Farmers and travelers learned to recognize the difference between harmless expansion and a genuine crack, trusting their instincts as they crossed. Winter taught everyone to listen closely, not just to weather, but to the land's subtle voice. The frozen waterways also became markers of time. People noticed how the ice thickened day by day, how cracks healed overnight as temperatures dropped, and how the surface texture changed depending on wind and snowfall. These small observations helped them predict the weather, guiding decisions about travel, fishing, and outdoor tasks. By living closely with the waterways, they understood winter not only through hardship, but through careful attention. As the cold persisted, some areas of ice turned cloudy and opaque, hiding the movement of the water below. Others remained clear, allowing glimpses into the depths, a silent reminder that life continued beneath the surface. These moments of clarity were mesmerizing, offering a quiet beauty that contrasted with the harshness above. People often paused to peer into the frozen world, appreciating the calm and mystery it held. And through all of this, the frozen waterways became symbols of winter's quiet dominance, beautiful, fragile, and demanding respect from all who relied on them. As winter deepened, the frozen waterways became central to the daily strategies of many communities. People learned which areas froze solid first, which sections developed thin patches, and how temperatures affected the stability of each surface. A slight shift in the wind or a sudden drop in temperature could alter the ice's strength within hours. This constant change meant that travel required not only caution, but a calm, focused awareness. Those who understood the waterways well became quiet guides for others, offering advice based on years of watching how ice responded to the season's rhythm. Some families living near rivers adjusted their routines entirely. They positioned temporary storage areas on the frozen surfaces, placing bundles of wood or baskets of food that could be easily transported later. The ice acted like a natural extension of their land, providing a wide, open space for organizing supplies. Children helped carry lighter items, walking with careful steps while adults monitored the ice for subtle signs of stress. These shared tasks brought everyone into a cooperative rhythm, one shaped by both necessity and patience. At times, the frozen waterways revealed unexpected challenges. Snowstorms could hide dangerous cracks beneath a smooth white layer, making travel risky even for those familiar with the terrain. People responded by tapping the ice with sticks or listening carefully for hollow tones beneath their feet. When doubt lingered, they chose safer routes along the banks. Winter taught them humility, a recognition that the frozen landscape, while useful, demanded respect and thoughtful judgment. If your thoughts are slowing gently, let them settle. The quiet surface of a frozen river carries the same peaceful effect, still, steady, and softly reflective. Nearby forests influenced the waterways in subtle ways. Trees shading the banks prevented certain areas from freezing fully, leaving pockets of dark, liquid water untouched beneath hanging branches. Animals often gathered at these rare openings, dipping their muzzles carefully before retreating back into the woods. Farmers observing from a distance understood these spots as reminders of life continuing quietly beneath winter's grip. During daylight, the frozen surfaces sparkled with crystals formed overnight. Sunlight caught the tiny formations, scattering reflections across the ice like a muted display of winter light. Travelers paused occasionally just to appreciate the scene, letting the simple beauty of it break the monotony of cold journeys. These small moments of reflection added warmth to otherwise difficult days, reminding people that even harsh seasons held gentle gifts. In some regions, people used simple sleds to carry goods across the ice. The runners glided smoothly over the surface, making transport efficient and surprisingly quiet. The sound of a sled moving across frozen water, soft, rhythmic, predictable, became one of the winter's calming signatures. It echoed through valleys and along river bends, a gentle reminder that life continued to move forward despite the freeze. Nighttime brought a different atmosphere to the waterways. Without sunlight, the frozen surfaces appeared darker, taking on deep shades of blue and grey. The sky above, often clear and filled with stars, reflected softly on the ice. Footsteps echoed more loudly in the quiet, each step creating a crisp, ringing resonance that felt almost musical. Travelers moved slowly, their lanterns casting warm circles of light that drifted across the surface like floating halos. From time to time, let your breathing grow slower, matching the stillness of the frozen night. This imagery is meant to guide you into deeper calm. Whenever temperatures shifted suddenly, the ice responded with deep, echoing cracks that traveled across long distances. These sounds could be startling, but those familiar with winter understood them as natural movements, expansion, contraction, and settling. The ice spoke in its own language, and people learned to interpret its tones, distinguishing between harmless groans and those that signaled caution. This understanding helped them navigate safely through unpredictable conditions. As the season continued, some sections of the frozen waterways were carved by people into long, smooth tracks used for walking or sledding. Maintaining these paths required daily effort, clearing snow, smoothing rough patches and marking areas where the ice remained stable. These pathways became communal spaces, bringing villagers together in quiet cooperation. Even in cold that stiffened fingers and chilled breath, shared work created connection. Toward the later part of the season, thin cracks began appearing more frequently. The ice no longer felt as solid underfoot, and water sometimes pooled beneath the surface, creating dark veins that hinted at rising temperatures. These changes were small but encouraging. People noticed them with a sense of anticipation, recognizing that winter's hold, though still strong, had begun to loosen. Travel across the frozen waterways slowed gradually as the season neared its turning point. People remained cautious, choosing to walk along the banks more often than crossing the central surfaces. The ice, once a reliable part of their routines, transitioned back into a shifting, uncertain landscape. With each change, people adjusted calmly, trusting that patience would guide them safely until the waterways melted fully. And as winter prepared to soften, the frozen rivers and streams stood as reminders of how deeply the season had shaped daily life. They had served as roads, challenges, resting places, and quiet mirrors reflecting the cold sky above. Through their transformation and eventual thaw, they carried the quiet beauty of winter, fragile, powerful, and deeply still. In towns that were usually lively with conversation and movement, winter introduced a stillness that felt almost unfamiliar. Streets that once carried the sound of footsteps and tradespeople calling out their goods became muted under blankets of snow. Each morning, residents stepped outside to a world softened by frost, where even the busiest corners felt calm and unhurried. The cold shaped the rhythm of life so thoroughly that people adjusted without realizing it, moving slower, speaking more softly, and letting the day unfold with gentle patience. This quiet shift became a kind of shared experience, uniting everyone in the hush that winter laid across the town. Shops opened for shorter hours, their doors creaking as they fought against icy hinges. Merchants stood wrapped in heavy layers, carefully organizing goods so customers could find what they needed quickly. Transactions were brief, accompanied by visible breath and quiet nods of understanding. There was no rush, no haggling, just calm exchanges that reflected the season's influence on human behavior. Even the busiest markets adopted this serene pace, as though winter itself encouraged people to preserve their energy and move gently through each moment. Town wells, once gathering places for short conversations, now became quiet stops where people worked efficiently before retreating indoors. Water drawn in buckets chilled almost instantly, forming thin rims of ice along their edges. Residents learned to carry them with both hands, shielding the contents from freezing wind. The simple act of drawing water became a small test of endurance, but also a reminder of how the Creator provided sustenance even in the harshest conditions. With each bucket carried home, people felt grateful for warmth waiting behind their doors. If your breathing has begun to slow slightly, let it happen naturally. These quiet towns move at a restful pace, and the story follows their rhythm. Snow-covered rooftops change the character of each building. Houses look softened, their sharp edges rounded by layers of snow. Smoke rising from chimneys curled slowly into the air, creating gentle trails that drifted above the town like faint signals of life within each home. These scenes, viewed from a distance, gave the impression of a peaceful miniature world wrapped in winter's calm embrace. The stillness made everything appear delicate and dreamlike, as though time itself had slowed to match the season. Families adapted their routines with care. Children helped sweep small paths in front of their homes, pushing aside snow so footsteps wouldn't slip. Adults planned outings only when necessary, knowing the cold demanded respect. When people met on the streets, their greetings were brief but warm, acknowledging the shared experience of enduring such a demanding winter. Even acts of kindness, offering firewood, helping with heavy loads, checking on neighbors, became more common, grounding the community in quiet cooperation. Public spaces, usually filled with activity, stood nearly empty. Benches along town squares remained untouched, their surfaces covered in frost. Fountains froze mid-motion, captured in silent sculptures of ice. These once busy areas transformed into serene winter scenes, visited only by travelers passing through or residents taking short walks to observe the town wrapped in snow. The absence of noise made every step audible, each crunch underfoot echoing softly across the stillness. In small workshops, craftsmen worked by lamplight, adjusting their tasks to suit the cold. Tools chilled quickly, making careful handling essential. Wood, leather, and metal reacted differently to the freezing air, demanding slower movements and more attention. This deliberate pace brought a meditative quality to their work, creating calm pockets of productivity in rooms warmed by small fires. The winter encouraged patience, and craftsmen allowed themselves to move with steady intention rather than urgency. If your mind drifts between the details, let it float. These quiet town scenes are designed to settle your thoughts, just like winter settled over the rooftops. Evening arrived early each day, casting long shadows across the town while lamps flickered to life behind frosted windows. Streets emptied quickly as families returned indoors to warmth and soft light. The sound of shutters closing, doors latching, and faint footsteps in snow marked the transition from day to night. Once darkness fully settled, the town entered a deeper stillness, as though resting together beneath the winter sky. Despite the challenges, there was a subtle comfort in this slowed life. The quiet allowed people to notice small details, patterns of frost on glass, the glow of lanterns reflecting on snow, the soft crunch of footsteps. Life became simpler, shaped by necessity and guided by the season's calm influence. These small observations brought moments of peace, reminding residents that even in difficulty, there was beauty in the world around them. Food preparation became a central part of daily life. Families cooked meals that warmed both the body and the space around them. Pots simmered slowly, filling kitchens with fragrant steam that softened the sharpness of outside air. Shared meals carried a deeper sense of gratitude during these cold months, each bite reminding families of the Creator's mercy in providing sustenance despite the harshness outside. Travel through the town grew slow and measured. People chose their paths carefully, avoiding icy patches and relying on familiar routes. Horses moved steadily, their hooves tapping gently against frozen ground. Every journey felt intentional, each step taken with awareness. This slower movement brought a sense of mindfulness to daily routines, encouraging people to focus only on what truly needed to be done. The town's boundaries also shifted subtly during winter. Snowdrifts formed along outer paths, reshaping familiar landscapes into new contours. Buildings appeared partially buried after heavy storms, their shapes softened by the accumulation of snow. These changes made the town feel smaller and more intimate, as though the community had drawn closer to stay warm and connected. Throughout these long days, the town's quietness became more than a lack of sound. It became a shared atmosphere, a gentle blanket that settled over everyone. People moved as though guided by the same slow pulse, grounded by the rhythm of winter. And within that stillness, life continued with a steady calmness that carried the community through the season. As winter settled deeper into the season, the town's rhythm became even more measured. People woke later, moving slowly through chilled rooms before stirring the first warmth into their homes. The quiet of early morning extended longer than usual, as though the town hesitated before beginning its day. Smoke rising from chimneys created gentle trails in the pale air, a visible reminder that life continued behind closed doors. These slow mornings shaped the tone of each day, encouraging residents to move with calm intention rather than urgency, accepting the winter's influence with steady patience. The marketplace, usually a lively hub of conversation, transformed into a subdued corridor of brief interactions. Merchants wrapped themselves in layers while arranging only the essentials, mindful of how quickly cold air settled into their fingers. Customers arrived with purpose, purchasing what they needed without lingering. Short exchanges replaced extended discussions, yet a sense of mutual respect remained. Every interaction was softened by shared understanding, as though the entire town acknowledged the unspoken agreement to conserve warmth and energy. Workshops glowed softly with lamplight as artisans focused on tasks that could be completed indoors. The sound of tools moving slowly across wood or metal echoed with a muted warmth that contrasted with the cold outside. Craftsmen adjusted their schedules, timing difficult tasks for midday when the air was marginally softer. This rhythm allowed them to work steadily without straining themselves in the harsher hours of morning and evening. Through these deliberate adjustments, productivity continued at a peaceful pace, grounded by the season's quiet influence. If your thoughts soften as you listen, let them drift. The rhythm of these slowed towns is meant to ease the mind into calmness. Even the town animals adapted to the quieter atmosphere. Cats curled near warm corners, conserving energy, while dogs ventured out only for brief patrols before returning indoors. Birds perched on rooftops, feathers puffed against the cold, watching the streets with curious stillness. Their presence offered gentle reminders that life persisted in subtle forms, quietly sharing the season's challenges with the people below. As the cold deepened, lanterns became essential companions during late afternoons. With daylight fading quickly, residents carried them to illuminate paths or brighten dim rooms. The warm glow cast elongated shadows across snow-covered ground, creating a contrast between cold air and gentle light. People walked slowly, lanterns swaying in their hands, turning each short journey into a serene passage through winter's quiet veil. These soft, glowing scenes became a hallmark of life during the coldest months. Community gatherings shifted indoors, taking place in warm rooms lit by small fires. Neighbors shared simple meals, stories, or updates about weather conditions. Though gatherings were smaller due to the cold, the sense of connection remained strong. Each meeting provided reassurance, proof that despite the quiet streets and chilled air, relationships endured. This closeness strengthened the community's resolve to face the season together. At night, the town felt even more hushed. Only the faintest sounds, a gust of wind, the distant creak of a shutter, or the soft movement of animals, broke the silence. Windows glowed faintly, revealing glimpses of families gathered in warmth. The stillness encouraged early rest, allowing people to let go of the day's efforts and drift into sleep guided by the peaceful darkness. These quiet nights became moments of restoration for the entire community. If your breathing deepens naturally, allow it. Winter nights in these towns inspire the same gentle rhythm. Snowdrifts continued to reshape familiar streets, piling against buildings and narrowing alleys. Residents adjusted routes accordingly, choosing paths packed down by previous footsteps. The town seemed to fold inward, each street becoming a narrow passage between walls of snow. Yet this closeness brought a sense of protection, as though the town shielded itself from winter by creating quiet corridors of shared movement. During brief warm spells, icicles formed along rooftops, catching the faint light and creating lines of shimmering glass. Children marveled at these delicate formations, though adults kept a careful eye to ensure they remained safe. Such small transformations became markers of time, subtle reminders that winter constantly shifted its shape even when its stillness seemed unwavering. As supplies dwindled slowly, families practiced thoughtful stewardship of what remained: firewood, preserved foods, warm clothing. This careful management became a natural part of daily life, blending seamlessly into the calm routines that defined the season. People trusted that with patience and reliance on the provisions granted to them, they would endure the coming weeks with steady resilience. The slowed pace also encouraged reflection. Without the usual busyness, residents found themselves noticing details they often overlooked during warmer months: the patterns frost left on glass, the heaviness of silence after snowfall, the soft glow of the sun filtered through winter haze. These quiet observations created moments of inner calm, grounding people in the beauty hidden within the cold season. By the midpoint of winter, the town had grown accustomed to its new rhythm. People moved with care, worked with patience, and supported one another with steady kindness. The cold still pressed firmly against their doors, yet inside, warmth continued through consistent effort and the mercy of the one who sustained them. Life carried on, softened and slowed, wrapped gently in winter's embrace. As the winter grew harsher, its effects became increasingly visible in the small details of daily life. What began as a quiet inconvenience had slowly transformed into a season that demanded more effort, more patience, and more resilience. The cold infiltrated every corner of the community, settling into homes, slowing travel, and pressing itself against even the sturdiest structures. People felt it in their bones when they stepped outside and saw it etched across frost-covered windows each morning. The cost of the cold was not measured in dramatic moments, but in the steady accumulation of small challenges that touched every part of life. For families with limited supplies, managing resources became a delicate balance. Firewood stacks grew smaller each week, and meals had to be planned carefully to ensure that ingredients lasted through the rest of the season. Some families cooked larger batches to conserve fuel, while others relied on simple dishes that required minimal warmth. Each decision carried weight, shaped by necessity and guided by gratitude for whatever provisions they still had. These quiet adjustments revealed both the difficulty of winter and the calm determination with which people faced it. Livestock needed more attention as the cold deepened. Farmers checked barns multiple times a day, making sure animals had enough feed and that their bedding stayed dry. Water troughs froze more quickly now, requiring frequent breaking and refilling with warmer water drawn from inside. Animals huddled together for warmth, their breaths forming soft clouds that lingered in the still air. These sights reminded farmers that every creature felt the cold, and that survival depended on diligence and compassion. If your mind drifts slightly as you listen, let it wander. Winter stories are meant to soothe, moving in quiet, steady waves. Travel became increasingly difficult. Roads blanketed in snow transformed into uneven paths where hidden ice threatened even the most careful step. Carriages moved slowly, wheels creaking against frozen ground. Travelers planned for delays, knowing that weather could shift rapidly and reshape their routes. Some journeys that normally took hours stretched into full-day efforts, marked by frequent stops to rest and warm themselves. The cold demanded patience, and those who traveled learned to move with its pace rather than their own. Merchants also felt the strain of the season. Goods that were easy to transport in milder months now stiffened or froze, making careful packing essential. Some items became too fragile to move at all. Markets experienced fewer deliveries, and shelves reflected the reduced supply. Yet townspeople adapted, choosing necessities over luxuries, and accepting that winter placed natural limits on what was available. This shared understanding strengthened the sense of community, as people navigated scarcity with thoughtful restraint. The cost of the cold also appeared in homes where structures strained under freezing temperatures. Wooden beams expanded and contracted with the shifting weather, sometimes creaking loudly at night. Doors became harder to close, as frost settled into their hinges. Families placed cloth along the base of windows to block drafts, creating small defenses against the persistent chill. These efforts, though simple, made a noticeable difference in comfort and warmth. Children felt the effects in their routines as well. Long days indoors tested their patience, and playtime required creativity within confined spaces. They constructed small forts from blankets, shaped figures from scraps of wood, or simply watched the fire with quiet fascination. Their laughter softened the heaviness of winter, offering lightness in moments where adults felt the season's weight most strongly. If your breathing begins to slow here, follow its rhythm. The calmness of these scenes is meant to help you settle deeper into rest. The elderly in the community faced particular challenges. Their joints stiffened in the cold, and moving around the home required more care. Neighbors checked on them regularly, bringing warm meals or offering help with tasks that had become difficult. These acts of compassion created a layer of warmth not found in fires or blankets, but in the shared responsibility people felt for one another. Food storage areas revealed the season's toll as well. Vegetables that had lasted through early winter began to soften or freeze unpredictably. Grains needed to be monitored closely to prevent moisture damage. Families rotated their supplies carefully, making sure nothing went to waste. This vigilance required constant attention, but it ensured that everyone could stretch their provisions as long as possible. The cold also affected tools and equipment. Metal cracked more easily, wood became brittle, and leather straps stiffened beyond use. Craftsmen spent extra time repairing and maintaining essential items, understanding that broken tools could disrupt crucial tasks. Their quiet work became another reminder of how winter influenced even the smallest pieces of daily life. Despite these difficulties, people found ways to stay hopeful. They gathered in warm rooms, shared stories from past winters, and reminded one another that harsh seasons eventually softened. The knowledge that winter had an end brought comfort, even when temperatures felt unrelenting. These shared conversations fostered strength, helping everyone feel less alone in the face of the cold. Through all of this, the cost of the cold was felt most in the quiet fatigue that settled into each day. Muscles tired more quickly, chores required more effort, and evenings arrived with a deeper sense of exhaustion. Yet there was also a certain pride in meeting winter's challenges with calm resilience. People endured not through grand displays of strength, but through steady, thoughtful persistence. This quiet endurance carried them through each frosted morning, reminding them that every day survived was a step closer to warmth. As the winter persisted, small cracks began to show not only in tools and structures, but in people's stamina as well. Fatigue settled deeper into daily routines, making even simple tasks feel heavier. Those who normally moved with brisk confidence found themselves slowing down, taking measured breaths before stepping into the cold. The exhaustion wasn't dramatic. It crept in quietly, accumulating through countless small efforts. Yet despite this weariness, people continued forward, anchored by their sense of duty and trust in the provisions allowed for them. Some families experienced the strain through their dwindling supplies. Barrels once filled with grain now echoed hollowly, and preserved foods were measured carefully to ensure the remainder lasted through the cold months. These moments required thoughtful choices, guiding families to prepare simple, efficient meals that warmed the body without exhausting their stores. Even in scarcity, there was a deep sense of gratitude for whatever remained, recognizing that sustenance came ultimately by the will of the Creator. The cold also placed strain on emotional well-being. Long nights and shortened days created stretches of quiet that felt heavier than usual. While many found comfort in the stillness, others struggled with the monotony. To ease this, families spent more time gathered together, sharing stories, working on small tasks, or simply sitting in companionable silence. These shared moments acted as gentle anchors, preventing the solitude of winter from weighing too heavily on any one person. If your thoughts soften here, that is welcome. This part of the story is meant to mimic the slow settling of snow, guiding you into deeper calm. Merchants felt pressure as well. Their shelves, once stocked with a broad range of goods, reflected the limitations of winter transport. Items ran out sooner than expected, and restocking became unpredictable. Customers understood these challenges, approaching shops with patience rather than frustration. This mutual understanding allowed the town to function smoothly, with everyone acknowledging the shared difficulty of the season. The cold also increased the need for cooperation within the community. Neighbors exchanged supplies when possible, offered help repairing damaged roofs or jammed doors, and checked on those who lived alone. These simple acts of care formed a network of quiet support that strengthened the town's resilience. Even when resources were limited, kindness remained abundant, creating warmth that winter could not diminish. Children sensed the heaviness of the season in their own way. While they adapted with surprising ease, adults noticed their growing restlessness. To help them cope, families encouraged activities suited to long indoor days, small crafts, reading aloud, or helping with manageable chores. These routines eased the children's energy while giving them a sense of purpose and connection during the quiet months. Illness posed additional challenges. The cold made minor ailments feel sharper, and recovery required more rest and warmth than usual. Families watched over each other carefully, recognizing symptoms early and providing comfort through warm drinks, thick blankets, and gentle attention. These shared efforts brought reassurance, strengthening bonds, and helping everyone feel protected through uncertain moments. If your breathing deepens or slows, allow it. The softness of these winter scenes is meant to help the body loosen its tension. Meanwhile, travelers passing through the region often arrived weary, their faces marked by wind and frost. Townspeople provided what they could: warmth, directions, leftover meals, knowing that travel in such conditions was a difficult endeavor. These brief encounters highlighted the contrast between life inside a sheltered home and the harsh reality of the open road. Each traveler carried their own story of endurance, blending into the broader narrative of winter's demands. The cold's most subtle cost was the way it shaped people's emotions. Even when spirits remained steady, there were moments when the weight of the season pressed a bit more heavily. A tired sigh near the hearth, a longer pause before stepping outside, a quiet moment of reflection as snow pressed against the window, all were signs that winter had seeped not only into the physical world, but into the emotional landscape as well. Yet through every quiet struggle, people remained grounded by patience and trust in the season's eventual shift. As the winter progressed, even the smallest signs of change, slightly softer air at midday, snow that melted into droplets before nightfall, became sources of encouragement. These hints reminded everyone that winter was not permanent, and that enduring its difficulties held meaning. The calm resilience developed through the coldest weeks prepared individuals and families alike for the gradual return of warmth. In this slow procession of days, the cost of the cold revealed not only hardship, but also the quiet strength that communities carried within them. Through cooperation, compassion, and persistence, they met the season's challenges with steady hearts. And even as the cold weighed heavily, their endurance illuminated a softer truth, that within hardship, there existed a quiet, shared courage that helped them continue, one patient day at a time. Beyond the edge of towns and farms, the natural world transformed into a quiet, frost-covered landscape that felt almost like a painting sealed behind glass. Every surface, from the tallest branches to the smallest blades of grass, carried a delicate shimmer of ice that caught the faint winter light. Forests grew still, their leaves long gone, leaving intricate networks of bare branches that glittered with frozen crystals. This stillness wrapped the land in a hushed calm, as though nature itself had slowed its heartbeat to match the season's quiet rhythm. Those who ventured outside felt the profound silence immediately, a silence that softened each step and encouraged gentle reflection. Animals moved differently in this frozen world. Birds conserved their energy, choosing short, purposeful flights instead of long journeys. Their feathers puffed outward for insulation, creating round silhouettes perched along branches dusted with frost. Small creatures that usually scurried lively across the forest floor moved with caution, leaving narrow trails through the snow. Their tracks looked fragile, almost temporary, soon to be covered by the next light snowfall. These delicate patterns told stories of quiet survival, each footprint marking a patient negotiation with the cold. Larger animals relied on instinct to navigate the frozen terrain. Deer moved slowly through the forest edges, their hooves pressing soft, rounded impressions into the snow. Occasionally, a fox trotted across open fields, its breath rising gently into the air before fading into the pale sky. Their presence added life to the otherwise motionless scenery, subtle reminders that nature continued its cycle even when the world appeared frozen in place. Observers watching from a distance often felt a sense of or at how these creatures adapted, guided by an instinctive understanding granted by the Creator. If your mind begins to drift while imagining these scenes, allow it. The pace of winter encourages a soft wander of thought. The trees stood tall but quiet, their branches coated with layers of frost like thin strands of glass. When sunlight touched them, even briefly, they sparkled with a soft glow, transforming ordinary landscapes into shimmering displays. During windless mornings, the frozen branches held still, creating reflections across the snow that resembled delicate lines etched into white paper. These moments of beauty felt fleeting yet unforgettable, offering gentle comfort during the coldest days. In meadows, snow formed smooth, untouched expanses that stretched into the horizon. The slightest breeze created faint ripples across the surface, and each ripple carried the promise of a slowly changing landscape. Frozen grasses bent beneath the weight of ice, their golden tips locked in place as though paused in mid-motion. For those who took time to observe, each meadow offered a sense of quiet balance, an interplay of cold, light, and natural form that invited calm contemplation. Forest streams, once lively with constant movement, transformed into narrow ribbons of ice. Beneath the frozen surface, faint currents still flowed silently, visible only in rare, clear patches where the ice remained thin. The gentle hum of running water had vanished, replaced by the stillness of a frozen shell covering living movement below. Standing beside a frozen stream brought an unusual sense of duality, life continuing beneath, hidden and patient, while the world above rested in stillness. If your breathing falls into a slower cadence here, let it ease naturally. These winter scenes are meant to calm both thoughts and senses. Birdsong became rare as winter deepened. The forest, usually filled with seasonal calls, now echoed only occasional soft chirps. Those few sounds felt amplified against the quiet, stretching further than they would in warmer seasons. Each call carried a calm weight, drifting across frosted branches like a gentle reminder that life continued in subtle ways. Listeners often paused, absorbing these rare sounds with heightened awareness. In certain areas, frost formed intricate shapes along rocks and roots, resembling delicate feathers or crystalline fans. These patterns came from moisture captured by the cold, shaped overnight into stunning natural artwork. People passing by would stop briefly to admire these small miracles, appreciating the quiet artistry that winter produced without effort or intention. Snowfall added new layers to the landscape with each passing day. Sometimes it came in soft flurries that drifted lazily downward, and other times in thicker waves that muffled sound instantly. After a snowfall, the entire world seemed reborn under a flawless sheet of white. Footprints, paths, and imperfections vanished, replaced by a blank canvas that reflected the soft light of distant skies. These moments created a peaceful freshness, encouraging a sense of renewal even in the heart of winter. Animals that remained active during winter adapted their routines to match the stillness around them. Owls hunted silently at dusk, gliding across snow with barely a sound. Squirrels emerged only briefly to retrieve hidden food, scampering quickly before retreating back into shelter. Each creature moved thoughtfully, conserving energy while navigating a landscape that demanded caution. Across open fields, the horizon often blurred with the sky as snow lifted gently in thin veils. These quiet blends of white and grey created an almost dreamlike atmosphere, softening edges and making distances harder to judge. This visual blur brought a sense of peaceful disorientation, as though the world had melted into layers of soft winter air, gently suspended in time. And through all these scenes, nature remained resilient, patiently enduring winter's grip, adapting with grace, and waiting for the slow but certain shift that would eventually return warmth to the land. As winter deepened, the forest canopy turned into a fragile ceiling of frost. During the coldest mornings, a thin mist hovered between the branches, clinging softly to the air like a veil suspended without movement. This mist blurred the edges of trees and softened shadows on the snow below, creating an otherworldly calm that felt almost timeless. Those who walked through the woods at these hours felt as though they were stepping into a world untouched, where every sound was quieted and every movement felt slow and deliberate. The stillness carried a peaceful weight, encouraging deep reflection with each step forward. When the wind finally stirred, the forest responded in gentle waves. Frost loosened from branches in tiny particles that shimmered briefly before settling onto the ground. These faint cascades resembled soft rain made of ice, falling without sound. Animals paused when the frost drifted down, aware of the subtleties in the air that humans often overlooked. For observers, these delicate showers became moments of serene beauty, as though nature offered small reminders of movement within the stillness. At times, the cold created strange illusions across open landscapes. Sunlight refracted through frozen air formed faint halos or shimmering arcs near the horizon. These sights were rare but memorable, lasting only moments before fading back into pale winter light. People who witnessed them often stood silently, unsure whether they were seeing a trick of the eyes or a fleeting natural phenomenon. Either way, these subtle displays highlighted how winter could transform even simple mornings into something quiet and extraordinary. If your mind begins to settle deeper into calmness here, let it continue. These gentle winter illusions are meant to soothe rather than excite. Frozen ponds developed intricate webs of cracks beneath their surfaces, forming branching patterns that resembled delicate etchings. Though the ice remained solid in most places, these visible lines revealed the constant shifts happening beneath the surface. The cracks stretched outward in graceful arcs, their designs changing slightly each day as temperatures fluctuated. For those who walked along the edges, these natural patterns became a source of fascination. Art formed by the cold itself, quietly reshaping the world in ways that required no human hand. In sheltered clearings, winter created pockets of silence so complete that even a whisper felt loud. Snow absorbed every sound, muting footsteps and softening echoes. Standing still in these places gave the impression that the world had paused entirely, waiting for some unseen signal to awaken again. These deep silences were not eerie. They were comforting, offering a rare space where thoughts could drift freely without interruption. Many travelers described these experiences as some of the most peaceful moments of the season. Along riverbanks, frost clung to reeds and grasses, layering them with thin coats that sparkled faintly in the midday light. The shapes of these plants became rigid yet beautiful, bending under the weight of ice while resisting the urge to collapse. Their perseverance echoed the quiet resilience of all living things enduring the winter. Observers stopping to admire these frozen sculptures often felt a sense of appreciation for the small details the season brought into focus. If your breathing grows slower as you imagine these scenes, let it follow its own peaceful rhythm. Winter landscapes encourage the body to settle into gentleness. Even the sky took on a different character during the coldest weeks. Clouds formed in soft, heavy layers, spreading evenly across the horizon like brushed strokes of grey and white. On some days, the sky remained so still that it felt like a vast ceiling pressing lightly down upon the land. On others, faint colours appeared, a muted pink or pale gold, shifting slowly as though unwilling to disturb the quiet below. These gentle colours added warmth to the stark landscape, bringing comfort through their soft presence. Wildlife continued to adapt as the season stretched on. Rabbits burrowed deeper, leaving fewer tracks. Birds flocked to sheltered groves where they could share warmth, creating faint rustles that carried through the otherwise silent air. Larger animals moved along familiar paths worn into the snow, their steady routines a testament to instinct and patience. Observers found reassurance in these patterns, recognizing that even amid the cold, nature maintained its steady rhythm. In high, open areas, the wind sculpted snow into smooth curves, shaping hillsides into gentle waves. These formations changed with every gust, revealing new contours each morning. People crossing these areas learned to read the snow the way sailors read the sea, gauging its depth, texture, and stability with each careful step. The wind's influence gave the land a living quality, constantly shifting yet always calm. When night arrived, nature under glass transformed again. Moonlight cast long silver lines across frozen lakes, while stars reflected faintly in patches of smooth ice. The world became a quiet mirror, holding both sky and earth in its stillness. Travelers often paused to take in these scenes, lingering for a moment before moving on. These nightly displays, gentle and silent, offered comfort that lingered long after morning returned. And through all these changes, the frozen landscape remained a patient guardian of the season, still, resilient, and quietly waiting for the subtle warmth that would eventually ease winter's hold. As winter reached its quiet peak, the first signs of change appeared so subtly that many people hardly noticed them at first. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but a slight shift in the air, something softer, something less biting. The wind carried a hint of gentleness, brushing against the skin without its usual sharp edge. Even the snow seemed to rest differently on rooftops, as though preparing to let go. These small, almost imperceptible moments signaled that the long season was finally beginning its slow release. People who stepped outside early in the morning sensed a delicate difference, even if they couldn't quite name it. The sun lingered a little longer each day. Its light, still pale and filtered through winter haze, stretched farther across the ground before fading. Shadows shifted gently, extending in new angles that hinted at the promise of change. Children noticed the difference before adults did, pointing out how sunlight reached corners that had been dim for months. While the temperature remained cold, these longer days carried a quiet reassurance, reminding the community that time was moving forward and that winter's hold, though sturdy, was not unbreakable. Frozen waterways, once thick with ice, began to reveal faint cracks near their edges. The cracks weren't deep, but they introduced glimpses of the dark water below. Farmers walking past these rivers paused, observing the subtle movement beneath the surface. The sight brought both caution and comfort. Caution because the ice no longer offered the same stability, and comfort because the shifting water meant that the world beneath the frozen shell was beginning to stir again. It was the first true sign that the season had reached its turning point. If your thoughts drift gently while listening, let them. These early hints of change are meant to mirror a slow awakening. Fields covered in snow began to show small dips and uneven patches as the sun softened their surfaces. Snow that once lay smooth and untouched now carried a slight give beneath the feet. Farmers noticed the way their boots sank just a bit deeper, creating impressions that felt softer and less brittle than before. The land seemed to be breathing again, loosening its long-held tension as it prepared for the gradual thaw ahead. These small shifts renewed hope in those who tended the fields, reminding them that the earth beneath was still alive. Icicles hanging from rooftops dripped at midday, forming tiny streams that froze again by evening. The steady pattern of melting and refreezing became a familiar rhythm, nature's way of signaling that temperatures had begun their slow climb. People listened for these drips as they performed their daily tasks, hearing in them a promise of approaching warmth. Even the repetition of the sound carried a soothing effect, like a quiet ticking clock marking winter's retreat. In the forests, animals became more active. Birds fluttered from branch to branch with renewed energy, their calls sounding clearer against the thinning silence. Deer ventured farther from their shelters, sensing that food would soon become easier to find. The sight of their footprints, more frequent now, gave travelers a gentle uplift, proof that nature itself recognized the change even before it became obvious to the human eye. These moments of increased motion signaled the beginning of a broader awakening. If you feel your breathing becoming softer and deeper, follow its gentle rhythm. The calmness of transition is meant to settle around you like a warm blanket. As days passed, the sunrise arrived with slightly more color. Soft shades of pale gold and muted pink began to appear along the horizon, touching the tops of trees with quiet warmth. Though temperatures remained cold, the slight glow hinted at what was to come. People waking early felt a quiet encouragement, as though the sky itself whispered that winter's peak had passed and that the long, slow journey toward spring had begun. The town's snow-covered streets showed faint pathways where compacted ice loosened under the sun. Children pressed their boots into these softer patches, noticing how the snow changed shape more readily than before. Adults watched from nearby, seeing these small changes as confirmation that the hardest weeks were behind them. Even small details, the sound of snow shifting underfoot, the slightly lighter texture of ice near walls, served as gentle reminders that the world was preparing to move again. Water wells, which had frozen so stubbornly during the coldest months, reacted differently to the changing weather. Ice that once clung tightly to the edges loosened slightly, allowing residents to draw water with a bit less struggle. Buckets didn't freeze quite as quickly, and handles no longer stuck so firmly to cold hands. These subtle improvements made daily routines easier, bringing a sense of relief that strengthened as the days grew longer. Trees, though still bare, showed signs of subtle change in their bark and branches. The tightness caused by extreme cold began to ease, allowing the wood to expand and settle naturally. Some branches even displayed the earliest hints of moisture returning beneath their surface. These signs were faint, visible only to those who observed closely, but they offered powerful reassurance that life remained intact beneath winter's icy exterior. Throughout these early signals, people remained cautious. Winter had lasted long enough for everyone to understand that its grip could tighten again unexpectedly. Yet even with this caution, there was a quiet optimism flowing through the community. The small signs, longer days, dripping icicles, shifting snow, brought comfort, allowing people to breathe a little more freely. And as these gentle changes continued, the world seemed to lean toward the promise of warmth, slow and steady, as though preparing itself for the soft unfolding of spring. As the days continued to lengthen, the changes in the landscape became more visible. Snowbanks that had stood tall for months began to settle, sinking into softer shapes. The crisp edges of drifts rounded out, and patches of soil appeared in the sunniest corners. People walking along familiar paths noticed these small openings in the white blanket, like early windows into the world beneath. Though the air remained cold, these glimpses of earth brought a sense of reassurance, a quiet confirmation that winter's dominance was slowly loosening. Waterways responded next. The ice that once stretched unbroken across rivers began to fracture in branching patterns, creating thin lines that traced their way across the frozen surfaces. Some cracks emitted soft groans during the warmest hours of the day, reminders that the water below was pushing gently against its icy shell. Observers approached with caution, watching as edges softened and pools of dark water formed where sunlight lingered longest. These shifts were subtle yet unmistakable, signs that the landscape was beginning its slow return to motion. Frozen fields also began showing signs of change. The snow covering them thinned in uneven patches, revealing the dormant soil beneath. Farmers walking across the land felt a difference in the texture under their boots. The ground had grown less rigid, more responsive to each step. Though still far from workable, the fields carried a quiet message of patience. The earth was preparing to wake, even if the process would take time. Farmers paused to absorb these signals, allowing themselves brief moments of hope before returning to their winter routines. If your thoughts begin to soften with these gentle transitions, let them drift naturally. This stage of winter has a slow, calming rhythm meant to lull the senses. In towns, the melting snow created small rivulets along streets, weaving around stones and flowing into lower paths. These tiny streams produced soft trickling sounds that people hadn't heard in months. The sound carried through quiet air with surprising clarity, creating a calm melody that accompanied daily tasks. For many, this subtle music offered comfort, a natural reminder that even the coldest seasons hold within them the seeds of change. Rooflines transformed as icicles broke away, sometimes with soft snaps, sometimes with gentle thuds as they fell into snowbanks below. Children collected the broken pieces, turning them over in their hands to admire the smooth, glass-like shapes. Adults watched with cautious amusement, appreciating the small joy these melting fragments brought. Each falling icicle marked a step toward warmer days, and their steady disappearance became a familiar rhythm as winter loosened its grip. Animals, too, sensed the shift. Birds returned to their patterns of early morning movement, hopping between branches with renewed energy. The sounds of their wings beating against the cold air added life to the quiet mornings. Squirrels emerged more confidently from their hiding places, digging through softened snow for food stored earlier in the season. Deer wandered closer to open fields, testing the ground and seeking new grazing spots. Their increased activity moved in harmony with the changing landscape. If your breathing deepens as you listen, allow it. These gentle observations are meant to steady the mind and settle the body. Even the sky hinted at change. Clouds lifted slightly, revealing more color and brightness than seen in weeks. Morning light arrived earlier, touching rooftops with a soft glow. The horizon took on warmer tones, shifting from winter's stark grays to muted golds and soft blues. These quiet shifts lifted people's spirits, reminding them that the long season of cold was slowly giving way to something gentler. Inside homes, people prepared for the transition. Tools were inspected, seeds set aside for planting, and equipment for spring work cleaned and repaired. Families began organizing spaces that had grown cluttered during months spent indoors, creating room for the coming changes. This preparation carried a bittersweet feeling, gratitude for the warmth to come, and a quiet respect for the winter that had tested their resilience so deeply. As thawing continued, residents found themselves stepping outside more often, searching for signs of renewal. Though winter still held pieces of its strength, the overall atmosphere had softened. The land no longer felt locked in ice. Instead, it seemed to breathe more freely, shifting a little each day. Every breeze carried hints of moisture, and each sunbeam felt slightly warmer against the skin. These moments of change created a gentle sense of anticipation that spread through the community. People moved with a lighter step, spoke with quieter optimism, and began planning for the days ahead. And though winter was not yet gone, its retreat offered reassurance, a reminder that even the coldest seasons eventually yield to warmth. And so, with small steps and slow transformations, the world prepared for the soft awakening that would arrive in the next chapter of the year. As the cold slowly released its hold, people began to look back on the winter they had endured. It wasn't only the temperature they remembered, but the way the season reshaped their routines, their thoughts, and their understanding of quiet endurance. The memories came in small fragments: mornings when frost thickened on windows, nights when even the warmest fires struggled to push back the chill, and moments when the stillness outside felt immense. These reflections didn't arrive all at once. Instead, they surfaced gently, carried by the awareness that the most difficult days had passed and that the world was easing toward warmth. For many, winter had become a lesson in patience. Long stretches of quiet taught them to move slowly, to appreciate the simplest comforts, and to accept that not everything could be controlled. The season demanded humility, reminding them that nature shaped the rhythm of life in ways humans could not always predict. People found themselves remembering how much care had gone into each day, tending fires, conserving supplies, protecting their homes, and checking on their neighbors. These memories held both weight and warmth, a combination that lingered even as the landscape softened. Families recalled the intimacy of long nights spent in warm rooms, sharing stories, or working on tasks that required steady hands and calm minds. Children remembered the glow of firelight dancing across walls, while adults remembered the sounds of the house reacting to the cold, the subtle creaks, pops, and sighs of wood expanding and contracting. These sensory details created a shared memory among households, tying them together in ways they had not expected. Winter had pressed them closer, revealing the strength of cooperation and the comfort of quiet companionship. If your thoughts begin to drift gently as you picture these memories, allow them to float. This part of the story is meant to soothe, not stir. Communities also recognized the importance of small acts of kindness that had carried them through the hardest days. A shared meal, a delivered bundle of firewood, or a simple check-in from a neighbor helped ease the strain of the cold. These gestures, though quiet, formed a network of support that strengthened the community's resilience. Looking back, people understood that these moments were not just practical. They were reminders of compassion's role in survival, especially during harsh seasons. Farmers reflected on the patience demanded by frozen fields and silent soil. They remembered how the land had seemed preserved in ice, waiting with a kind of quiet determination for warmth to return. The bitter cold had slowed their work but deepened their appreciation for the cycles of creation. As they stood on thawing ground, they recognized the endurance required not just from the land, but from themselves. Winter had tested their steadiness, and now the earth felt ready to begin again. Travelers recalled the long, cautious journeys they had taken across icy roads and frozen waterways. They remembered the eerie beauty of moonlit snow, the crisp echo of footsteps, and the moments when silence felt so complete that even breathing seemed louder. These memories held a mixture of awe and fatigue, an appreciation for the landscape's stark beauty, paired with respect for the challenges it demanded. With winter lifting, they began to move with more ease, carrying forward the lessons of careful observation and patience. If you feel your breathing slowing here, follow its natural rhythm. These reflections are meant to settle softly around you. Merchants looked back on days when goods froze before they could be sold, when deliveries arrived late, and when even the act of opening a shop required determination. Despite the obstacles, they remembered the resilience displayed by customers who adapted with calm understanding. The season had reshaped their routines, but it had also revealed a sense of unity within the town, an understanding that everyone faced the same chill and the same constraints. These memories carried a quiet pride in how the community navigated scarcity with grace. Craftsmen remembered working with chilled tools, gloved hands, and breath that clouded the air around them. The winter slowed their pace but sharpened their focus, adding a meditative quality to their work. Looking back, they found themselves appreciating the discipline that cold months required, the way it taught them to move deliberately, to value precision, and to find peace in repetition. These lessons lingered long after the air began to warm. Families reflected on the small, ordinary routines that had become reassuring anchors: lighting the hearth, preparing simple meals, checking windows for drafts, and gathering before the fire as evening settled. These quiet habits brought stability, turning long nights into peaceful rituals. Even as the season's difficulties faded, the warmth of those shared moments remained vivid, filling hearts with gratitude for the mercy and protection they had received. And as memories continued to surface, people began to understand that winter had given them more than it had taken: patience, unity, quiet resilience, and a deeper appreciation for warmth in all its forms. As warmth continued its slow return, townspeople noticed how the first true breezes of early spring carried a different weight. They were no longer sharp or biting. Instead, they brushed softly against the skin, bringing with them the faintest hint of renewal. Windows were opened just long enough to let in a whisper of fresh air, and for the first time in months, that air felt welcoming rather than harsh. People paused in these moments, appreciating the gentleness of the changing season and recognizing how deeply they had missed the sensation of warmth drifting through their homes. Paths once buried beneath layers of snow became visible again, outlined by strips of damp earth. As sunlight rested longer on rooftops, icicles fell one by one, leaving behind small glistening puddles that slowly seeped into the ground. These changes felt subtle, yet profoundly comforting. Each melting shard and each soft footprint in thinning snow served as a quiet reminder that time had carried them through the hardest stretch. The landscape, though still cold, was slowly unfolding, revealing once hidden details of color and texture beneath the fading winter blanket. Forests responded with small but meaningful shifts. Branches that had been rigid with frost began to relax as moisture returned to the bark. The soundscape changed as well. Instead of complete silence, the woods now carried gentle rustles, soft tapping as melting snow fell from branches, and occasional birdsong returning after long absence. These delicate noises signaled life stirring again. Observers who walked through these woods felt a sense of relief, sensing the slow revival of the natural world that had stood patient and still for so long. If your thoughts soften as you imagine this slow reawakening, you can let them drift without effort. These moments are meant to bring calm. Fields that had endured months under deep frost now appeared textured with shallow snow, softened by longer hours of daylight. Farmers surveyed their land with eyes that mixed caution, gratitude, and renewed determination. Though the soil was not yet ready for planting, it responded differently beneath their boots, less rigid, more alive. They understood that the transformation ahead would take time, but the very possibility of growth brought comfort. The land had endured, and so had they. In towns, people began adjusting their routines once more. Thicker coats were still necessary, but no longer worn with the same urgency. Children stayed outdoors a bit longer, testing the boundaries of the softening cold. Adults exchanged small remarks about the weather shift, each comment reflecting quiet hope. Even the simplest tasks, carrying water, sweeping pathways, airing out linens, felt lighter without winter's oppressive weight pressing down on every movement. Wildlife responded as well. Birds returned to their early morning flights, calling out in brief, melodic notes that echoed between buildings and across open fields. Small animals ventured farther from shelter, searching for emerging plants or scraps of leftover grain. Their presence added gentle motion to landscapes that had remained frozen in stillness for so long. These early signs of movement brought a sense of harmony to the changing season. If your breathing deepens, allow it. This stage of the story is meant to ease you even further into calmness. With each passing day, people found themselves reflecting not only on winter's difficulties but also on the resilience they had discovered within themselves. The season had required steady discipline, quiet strength, and thoughtful adaptation. Looking back, many realized how much they had leaned on one another, and how deeply that shared experience had strengthened their sense of community. Winter had drawn them closer, shaping bonds that would endure long after the cold faded into memory. There was also a quiet appreciation for the Creator's mercy in sustaining them through a season so demanding. Every fire lit, every meal prepared, every moment of warmth shared inside a home had been a sign of provision and protection. These reflections brought comfort, grounding people in gratitude for both the endurance they had been given and the relief that was now slowly arriving with the changing weather. As the landscape continued to thaw, the world seemed to exhale, releasing the long-held tension of winter. Snow shrank back from the edges of fields, rivers cracked open to reveal flowing water, and sunlight filtered through branches with a newly softened glow. These moments felt like gentle invitations to begin again, quiet reminders that even the harshest seasons eventually give way to renewal. And so, as this extraordinary winter transitioned into memory, people carried forward not only the story of cold, but the lessons it had quietly taught them. lessons of patience, unity, gratitude, and the quiet strength found in facing each day with steady resolve. Thank you for listening to this gentle journey through one of the coldest winters of the 19th century. May the calmness of this story stay with you as you rest, and may your night unfold with warmth, peace, and deep, restorative sleep.